Hey dudes, today we're going to talk about another fan-made Magic set. It seems really likely that anyone watching this video has probably seen my video on the Middle Ages bootleg Magic set, as that is my second most viewed video, but if you haven't, that's something else you can watch. Middle Ages was really interesting because that set went to production and was sold in some game stores and stuff. I think the guy's name was Frank, and he got mega sued by WotC, which is really hilarious because before that, they had just gotten out of a lawsuit for making something for someone else's game. No honor among thieves, I guess. This set is interesting for different reasons, and as far as I can tell, this set was never released to the public and was just somebody's way of expressing their creativity. In fact, as far as I could tell, the only trace of this set on the internet comes from a contest held by Inquest Magazine. They often held card contests for people, and Paul of Manhattan Thompson decided to submit his custom sticker set to a custom card contest, and he won the contest. This was in 1998, but according to the single source I could find of this set, it was made in 1995. There is very little information on this set, at least as far as I could tell, so I can't really give you much for context on these cards. In fact, the only scrap of information I could find came from the Magic Librarities. But all Magic Librarities had on this is a little cut from Inquest number 37. For this special April Fool's card creations, we've got to give kudos to Paul Thompson of New York City. Lots of people send us funny cards, but Paul made up an entire expansion called Annoying Kingdoms and sent it in. For his efforts, we're sending him the 4 pre-constructed Stronghold decks. Good work. And that's about all of the information I have on this set. Other than the cards themselves, we do have the text and images of all 72 cards from this set. So I thought it would be fun to look at them and talk about them a little bit. I guess it's also worth noting that these are likely not rigorously playtested and are more just for fun. This isn't a professional game company selling a game, it's just a fanfic, so bear that in mind and maybe be a little generous. Otherwise, the next actual set review that'll come out is Homelands. I hope you're excited for that, but not too excited because I haven't started on it, but I'll likely get that project going within the next month. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's look at the 72 stickers that made up the Annoying Kingdoms. Dun, dun, dun. First, we have Aeon Flux, a 3/4 creature that costs 3 generic and 2 black mana. This creature is a summon assassin and has an activated ability. You can pay 2 black mana and tap Aeon Flux to bury any creature that has an upkeep cost associated with it. Then the flavor text helps you explain what you're supposed to do with this card, not the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. Thank God somebody realized that Tabernacle needed support pieces to be good. That's pretty neat, and I do appreciate that these cards don't swap the name and summon line like they did in the Middle Ages one, but it does seem pretty bold to put a copyright line on something you don't own the rights to. Granted, the copyright is about the art, and as far as I know, Paul either did create or secure the rights to the art he used, or maybe he didn't. Like I said, I have no clue. Anyway, funny stuff, let's move on. Next we have Ancestral Payback. Ancestral Payback is an instant that costs 2 blue mana. Discard any 2 cards from your hand, or your entire hand, whichever is less. If any spell or effect causes you to discard Ancestral Payback, that spell or effect's controller must discard 4 cards, or their entire hand, whichever is less. It's a little wordy, but it's basically a weird fusion of One with Nothing and Psychic Purge. Mind Twist was a huge problem back in the day, and even when it stopped being such an issue because it was like banned, people still had to deal with Hymn to Torak, so seeing custom designs like this is not that surprising. The wording is a little excessive, but it is a pretty neat idea. Plus, the art is hilarious. Then we have Assimilate Enchantment, and I'm pretty sure the art features a board cube, which is pretty funny. Anyway, Assimilate Enchantment is an enchantment, or an aura that targets enchantments, that costs 1 and 3 blue mana to cast. Target enchantment card is considered to have been cast by you while Assimilate Enchantment enchants it. You may retarget enchantment as if you had just cast it. If this card leaves play, place the card it enchanted in owner's graveyard. Fancy. So this is a sort of control magic, but for enchantments. It also basically lets you instead recast the enchantment, presumably to put it on what you want instead. This is a pretty balanced card, honestly. Having it cost 3 blue is a pretty wise choice, but this design would likely be a rules nightmare. Kind of an interesting idea though. But let's move on. Then we have Aura of Originality, an enchant creature that costs 2 generic and a blue to cast. When Aura of Originality comes into play, the creature it enchants is treated as the first legendary creature brought into play of its type. All other creatures in play of the same type are buried. Oh, that's kind of neat. This card exists as a way to combat the issues with the legendary rule at the time. This card is interesting because its original purpose isn't really needed anymore. They changed the legend rule, but this card does still destroy, without possibility of regenerating, all other creatures with the same name as it. That's kind of neat. This is a type of card that would maybe show up in sideboards if the meta was very specific. Like I said, it's kind of a neat idea. This next one is kind of weird. It's called Avoid Martyrdom, and it's an instant that costs X and 2 green mana. X target creatures are unaffected by target non-targeted spell or effect. That's really funny, and I'm pretty sure this kind of thing doesn't or didn't work in the rules, but hey, it's a custom set. It just works. This is kind of interesting, and the idea of it seems to be to protect your stuff from cards that don't target, like Wrath of God or Earthquake. The naming convention of it does kind of make it seem like he's targeting a specific card of some sort, but if these were made in 1995, the only cards with Martyr in them are Martyr of Corliss, Martyr's Cry, and Blood of the Martyr, none of which makes sense in that context. So it's likely he was just targeting stuff like Wrath of God or Earthquake. It's a neat idea, I guess, but I'm very certain this kind of effect does not or would not have worked in the rules, but it is very interesting. Next up is the Batonian Face Touchers, a 0/1 creature that costs 0 and it counts as a white card, and it has banding. What a deal. Actually, the banding does kind of make this broken in a stupid way, at least at the time. It's a very funny card, those gosh darn face touchers. Anyway, card number 7 is Beavis and Butthead, a classic and cultured reference. Beavis and Butthead is a 1/1 summon idiots that costs 2 black mana. You can tap and sacrifice Beavis and Butthead to counter any spell or effect which changes or can change the text of another card. So, Beavis and Butthead can prevent a Chaos Lace or a magical hack from going off. I'm pretty sure this would also work on stuff like Blood Moon, but who's to say with a custom card? Either way, this is pretty funny. What a cool card. The next card we have is the Benevolent Sphere of Dave, an enchantment that costs 1 and 2 white mana to cast. It has an upkeep cost of 2 life. All white creatures controlled by you gain flying and first strike. This card is restricted. Huh, that's kind of neat. So, the One Ring fiasco brought up a discussion that that card should have had rules text limiting it to 1 copy per deck. As far as I know, that's never appeared on a legal card, but there are a lot of those, so maybe it did happen at one point. And it's kind of cool to see that concept played out in a custom set fucking 20-30 years before that. It is kind of cool to see the concept here, though. And this card is also interesting because most cards that affected every card of a specific type at the time affected both yours and your opponent's. I can see why he chose to restrict this card, as it breaks parity without any effort on your part, which was a major consideration at the time. I doubt this card would have actually been good enough to warrant the restriction, but it is a cool idea, and the logic is sound in my opinion. And also, it's just a fucking hilarious concept for a card. I really love the name Benevolent Sphere of Dave. It's so fucking funny. Then we have Black Mojo of Bloooogh, which is a sorcery that costs 3 and 4 black mana pips for a total of 7 mana. That's a rough mana cost. Target player loses 1 life, discards 1 card from his or her hand, destroys 1 permanent under his or her control, then taps 1 untapped permanent under his or her control. How hilarious. That's a pretty excessive mana cost for the effect, but the effect is pretty decent. Generally, you'd prefer to make the choices than give your opponent the choice, but this is still a pretty interesting card. The art is hilarious, as are the references. And speaking of references, next up is Brothers Gibb. Fantastic. Brothers Gibb is a 1/3 summon clowns that costs 3 and a red mana. Any creature blocking or blocked by the Brothers Gibb is immediately marked with a Brothers Gibb token. While any Brothers Gibb tokens are on a creature, it in all ways becomes a Brothers Gibb. What a timely reference that I'm sure everyone watching will understand immediately. This one is pretty funny. And the mechanic has that old school Magic sense of being interesting and unique, but ultimately not very good. What a funny card. Burlesque Miracle is an instant that costs 2 and a white mana. Choose target creature in any graveyard and target opponent. Opponent chooses an article of clothing you are wearing. Oh god. If you remove it for the remainder of the game, target creature comes into play on your side. I can't say I was expecting that. Hilarious. I guess this set does have a sort of unset feel to it, so I guess this isn't super out of place, but damn, you must play with some sexy Magic players if you think designing a card like this could be a good time for anyone. Funny stuff. Not nearly as funny as Cloak of Respect. This one is an enchantment that costs 3 and a white mana. Choose Star, which is either My Lord or My Lady. Choose target opponent. For every sentence directed at you, that opponent fails to begin or end with variable, that player suffers 1 point of damage. What a wild way to phrase that. So basically, when you cast this enchantment, you declare My Lord or My Lady, and if your opponent utters a sentence that doesn't start and end with your chosen title, that opponent takes a damage. This is a very unset style card, and cards like this aren't made anymore, even in joke sets, because they ruin fun by encouraging players to just never talk to each other. This one is also interesting because it specifies sentences. So I think you could argue that if you never uttered a complete sentence, you could ignore this. I'm sure arguing the rules of a card like this is really fun and not the worst experience you could possibly have. But it is kind of an interesting idea. It's also incredibly cringe, but I did laugh about it. Clockwork Abyss is an enchantment that costs 2 generic and 2 black mana. Each player must sacrifice 1 artifact creature to the Clockwork Abyss during their upkeep. If a player has no artifact creatures to sacrifice during upkeep, the Clockwork Abyss will bury the first 2 artifact creatures that come into play on that player's side for the rest of his or her turn. So this is like the Abyss, but for Clockwork Beast and Ornithopter. The Abyss doesn't hit artifact creatures, this deals with that little weakness, and you can even have both in play since this isn't a world enchantment. Finally, a way to make the Abyss playable. At least this is harder to cast. Cloying Gift is next, and this card is genuinely interesting. This is a sorcery that costs 1 and a black mana. Caster removes 1 card from his or her graveyard and places it in target opponent's hand. Remove Cloying Gift from the game. So that's kind of neat. Generally, cards that are owned by one player cannot end up in the hand, deck, or graveyard of the other player, and the only time they ever messed with this involved ante. So this card probably never really worked within the rules, but as I've said before, that's hardly the point of custom cards. This card is interesting, but I'm not actually sure why you'd want to do this. There might be some funny shit that I'm not thinking of because the game didn't get this kind of support in real life, but I can't think of what you would do with this. Especially only using cards that were released by 95. Still, it's a cool concept, and I appreciate the guardrails on this card so that you can't use it again and again. It's a cool idea. Next up is Counterblast. Counterblast is a sorcery that costs a single red mana. Destroy any counter or token in play. You may have up to 6 Counterblasts in your deck. So this is kind of neat for a couple of reasons. Blowing up specifically counters or tokens is not a common effect. And while this would likely be too niche to be actually good in most situations, it is a really cool idea. The main issue is you're spending a card to remove something that isn't a card, which is generally not a great use of resources, but again, it is a really cool idea. The concept of allowing you to play more than the normal amount is also kind of a really cool idea, but personally I do prefer more variance in card games than less, and I kind of prefer it when you're... I prefer games with singleton rules over all of this, but it is a cool concept. Up next is CounterOOP, an interrupt that costs a single blue mana. Counter an out of print... Oh, out of print. I'm an internet dork and I thought that meant original post. Counter an out of print card as it is being cast. Cards which are out of print but are being reprinted in current sets are not considered out of print. This spell does not work on Fallen Empire's cards. That's a funny joke. So this is a pretty interesting approach, and I guess it was a good opportunity to throw shade at Fallen Empires. And I guess these days this would work fine with, everyone having Scryfall in their pocket. It would be okay. But this would be an annoying card to resolve with all of the arguing it would bring on, especially back in the day. It is pretty funny though. Counter out of print. Very hilarious. Very, very hilarious. Oh boy, up next is Dachshund Bomb, an instant that costs 1 and a green mana. Sacrifice a War Dachshund to do a number of points of damage divided any way you choose among target creatures and players equal to the current power of the Dachshund sacrificed. That's kind of interesting. That's not too different from Goblin Bombardment, other than the damage being determined by the sacrificed creature's power. Goblin Bombardment didn't come out until Tempest, which was 97, and these cards were apparently made in 95, which does track with the use of the card types and some of the Moxen references we'll see later, which probably wouldn't have been as common by 97, but they would have been fairly common in 95. My point here is that I think this is an original idea here, which is pretty cool. It's not such a complex card that I think WotC stole the idea or anything, but I do think it was a pretty cool idea by Paul. Yeah, I guess let's move on to Dachshund King, a 2/4 Dachshund King that costs 4 and a green mana. While Dachshund King is in play, all War Dachshunds in play get +1, +2, and first strike. So that's pretty cool. This is just a Lord card. There was a bunch of them already in Alpha, and Paul here solved the Goblin King problem by making 2 creature types, War Dachshunds and Dachshund King. This way, the lore doesn't buff itself. It was a real head scratcher of a design problem back in the day. Anyway, we're far from done with the Dachshunds, so prepare yourself for more cute as fuck wiener dogs. Dachshund Medic is a 0/3 war Dachshund that costs 2 and 2 green mana. You can pay 3 green mana to regenerate target war Dachshund. That's a pretty cool support piece for your new Dachshund tribe. It's pretty balanced too. I'd have been tempted to cost that effect at 2 mana myself, so good on you. The art is really cute too. Next up is Dachshund Rapture, a sorcery that costs 3 and 2 green mana for a total of 5. Remove all war Dachshunds from your graveyard and put them directly into play on your side as if just summoned. Any player may pay 1 for each war Dachshund they wish to prevent re-entering play. Remove these war Dachshunds from the game. That's kind of fun. Sort of like a Rise of the Dark Realms or whatever, but for your Dachshunds. And it even has that classic your opponent can counter each of these by paying a life effect that I personally think is fucking hilarious. This is a fun card. Hell, this whole set would probably be a pretty funny time. It definitely has the vibe of an unset, which is a personal taste not everyone has. I think they're funny in their own way if you don't take Magic too seriously, but you do kind of need to buy into the joke for this stuff to like not be cringe. The Dachshund stuff here is just kind of silly, but otherwise these cards could have, you know, just been regular Magic cards. A lot of these are fairly well designed given the game experience at the time. Next we have Dachshund Shrine, an enchant land that costs 2 and 2 green mana. Oh, but it's not a shrine, he didn't predict that. Can only target a land under your control. Sacrifice the land Dachshund Shrine enchants to give all your war Dachshunds +2/+2 and flying until end of turn. Okay, so that's an interesting take on Goblin Shrine. I like the concept of sacking it to get the value, but this kind of thing is commonly seen as a fake cost since it's the kind of thing that you do when you win the game, so sacking the land doesn't really do anything in that instance. But it does mean that you can only use this effect once, so I think it is a decent use of that kind of costing effect in this instance. I'm very impressed with a lot of these cards, and the ones that I'm not a huge fan of are at least interesting. This is a surprisingly cool set of cards so far. I'm very much enjoying these. Next we have Dachshund Soldier, a 2/2 war Dachshund that costs 1 and 2 green mana. It is a vanilla beyond that, but I really appreciate the discipline and design that is being shown here. The support pieces for these Dachshunds are pretty good, so making it harder to cast these outside of green is pretty insightful, in my opinion. It's clear that a lot of love went into these, and I think they're pretty funny and incredibly well done. Dachshund Spymaster is next, and this war Dachshund is a 0/1 that costs 2 and 2 green mana. You can pay 2 green mana to look at a random card in target opponent's hand. You can pay an additional green to exchange that card with one from the opponent's graveyard. That's fucking hilarious. I love that a lot. 4 mana to switch an opponent's card is so much fucking mana, but if you consider things like regrowth, this does kind of make sense in green's color pie. This is so fucking funny. I'm a big fan of this card. That's so great. I mean, it's not. It's expensive. It's a bad card, but it's hilarious. Anyway, the last of the Dachshund support is Dachshund Warriors, a 1/1 that costs a single green mana. Once again, I appreciate the discipline of not making this card stronger. Very cool. Very good. Very funny. Yeah. Also, all the art on these was pretty great. This is fucking amazing. I love the Dachshunds. Very cool. Next we have Dark Sylph, a 2/1 creature that costs 2 and 2 black mana. You can tap and sacrifice Dark Sylph to remove target non-artifact creature from the game. That's pretty neat. Nothing super crazy, but fairly strong for the time, and really interesting too. It gets past regeneration, and it exiles, which is certainly useful. Yeah, I guess I don't have much to say about this. It's just kind of a nuts and boltsy style interaction piece. It is pretty inspired for the time. I do appreciate it. Distracting Jawline is an interrupt that costs 2 blue mana to cast. Tap any number of mana producing permanents in play under control of a single player in any Magic game in the same room as you except your own. This mana is added to your mana pool. If any player from the other game shows you a card or effect under their control or in their hand which could counter this spell is countered. Cannot be used on someone who does not own any Annoying Kingdoms card. Yeah, this is just a fucking unset. That's really funny. The first unset came out in 98, and these were made in 95, apparently. Wow. I wonder if old Mark Bongwater saw some of these. Very funny stuff. Personally, I've never been a huge fan of cards that mess with the with other games. They have a very specific niche. But they are definitely funny in the right situation. And this stuff is pretty creative. It's well made, and I would assume this guy knew what kind of experience the people he was personally playing with enjoyed. Very, very funny shit, if you're into that, which I would assume these people were. Then we have Dystopian Mana Guy, a 0/1 artifact creature that costs 2 to cast. You can tap Dystopian Mana Guy to add 1 mana of any color except those colors which lands under your control provide. This ability is played as an interrupt. That's kinda neat. Sort of like an Ornithopter of Paradise, but with an extra fun puzzle attached. It's pretty cool. Another design that's just interesting and useful in many ways. Sort of similar to Fellwater Stone, I guess. It's just a Mana Dork version of that. But yeah, I guess not quite, because Fellwater can produce mana that you own. This one can't. Similar idea though. Let's move on to Fluffymuffin Cocobutter. Fluffymuffin Cocobutter is a 1/1 summon anemic legend. Anemic? Okay, so we'll come back to the anemic bit, I guess. Anyway, Cocobutter here costs 4 green mana and cannot be the target of any spell or effect. He is unaffected by anything which would remove him from play. A Fluffymuffin Cocobutter can only leave play when the current game is over. Huh. Again, I don't think carve-outs like that work in the rules, but we'll look past that. Assuming this works, and this can't be removed once it's in the game, it's interesting. It's the kind of thing that could shut off decks that didn't have a way to fly or trample over, but if you're aware it's part of the game, then I don't think this is all that brutal. It's just a little 1/1, which is certainly not useless, but it's also fairly easy to overcome. And there are, it's not like you can buff this up either, right? Because you can't target it either. Assuming there aren't ways to work past what it's trying to do, I think this is just kind of interesting. Yeah, I don't know. It is a neat idea. But I'm really excited to find out what sort of relevance Anemic could have. Like, depending on what sort of support pieces exist, I might change my mind on this not being broken, but for now, it's pretty cool. But what the fuck does anemic mean? Like, I mean, I know what anemic means, the word, but what does that have to do with magic? Very, interesting. Very interesting. Obviously, at this point, I've looked over all these cards and written a script for this, but while writing this, I had no idea what these mean, so we'll get back to that. Gator Swarm is a 2/2 creature that costs a black and a red and a green mana to cast. This creature can only be blocked by a number of blockers equal to the number of gators that this card's controller has in play. Okay, so if you have 2 copies of this gator, they both have menace, and if you have 3, each of them can only be blocked by 3 creatures. That's kind of intense, but otherwise they are just 2/2s that cost 3 mana, and it's one of each color, so it is a very difficult 2 mana 3/3 or 3 mana 2/2 to cast. It's sort of an alternative take on the whole like Plague Rats thing, which is sort of neat. There are not other summon gators in this set, and I do not think there are any real summon gators, at least in the sets available in 95. But this is kind of neat. It's just a cool thing to build a deck around, but not really that strong. It is very interesting though. I like the idea of it. Next is Genie Farm, a card with an exclamation mark in its name. How exciting. Get hyped. This enchantment costs 2 and a green to cast, and it has an anti-style. Remove this card from your deck if any Djinn, Genie, or Ifrit cards are in it. That's funny, I've never seen that on a Magic card before. That's pretty neat. Whenever a Djinn, Genie, or Ifrit is put into play, place a counter on Genie Farm! Exclamation mark. Whenever a Djinn, Genie, or Ifrit is put into play, place a counter on Genie Farm. Pay 0, remove a counter from Genie Farm to put a 0/1 Flying Genie Weasel. Flying Genie Weasel token into play. If a Flying Genie Weasel blocks or is blocked by a Djinn, Genie, or Ifrit, remove both creatures from the game. Yeah, Djinns and Ifrits, man. Strong cards. It would make sense you would want an answer for it. This card is really funny and kind of stupid in a way that brings me great joy. It's likely not great, but if you're just rocking Djinn and Ifrit, you definitely need to remove this from your deck because you're not allowed to play it. Next we have Grub Sprite. Grub Sprite is a 0/1 creature with flying that costs a single red mana. The art is hilarious, and this is a pretty simple card, but it isn't super strong. It is fairly efficient. It's a neat but simple design. So let's just move on to Horrible Frog Stamp, an artifact that costs 5 mana. Comes into play tapped. While untapped, the Horrible Frog Stamp buries all permanents and counters all spells with a scry current issue median value of $45. Any opponent may give you $2 to purchase this card from you when it is in play. Card is put into purchaser's graveyard at that time. Does that use like the batch, the stack? Can you do that in response to the activation? How does all that play out? Holy shit. Man, fuck your card. Here's $2. What happens when, hypothetically, Scry stops making issues? It says current issue, not latest issue. Does this just not work anymore? This is really funny. It's hard to take this card seriously, so I won't even bother. What a stupid thing that made me laugh way more than I'd like to admit. Funny stuff. Howling Mind is an artifact that costs 3 mana, and each player draws 2 extra cards during their main draw phase. What the fuck is a main draw phase? Moving beyond that, this is pretty cool. It did always feel weird to me that Howling Mind is a mine, and that's how you're drawing cards. The flavor to mechanics takes a bit to figure out, I guess. Howling Mind is a brain card, and brain cards draw cards. Super simple and easy to understand for smart brain guys like me. Funny little reference, but there isn't much to say here. Next we have Killer Clown, a 1/1 creature that costs a single blue mana and has Mountain Walk. Not sure that I understand the story that's being told here, and the flavor text didn't really help either. It's a decent card though, at least through the standards of the time. Kinda interesting. Anyways, this next one is fantastic. This is Kitty, a 3/3 summon kitty that costs 4 and 2 black mana for a total of 6 mana. It has Planeswalk, which is pretty funny on its own. Controller of permanent or caster of spell, which removes kitty from play, suffers 5 damage. If an argument over who is really responsible for removing Kitty from play occurs, contact Paul Thompson for a final ruling. So, as I've said, but if it isn't obvious, these were likely made for fun for a group of people that Paul played with regularly. This is fucking hilarious. Imagine having to call up some fuckhead to rule your game of Magic. Very hilarious. I also can't believe the balls to write on a card to have people bother you about their dumb game involving your custom cards. Hilarious stuff. The ability is also pretty interesting, but it is a fucking ruling nightmare, as you could probably tell from the card just saying, hey, call this guy. Either way, let's meet Lady Flower Mercia, a 3/3 anemic legend that costs 2 white, 2 blue, and 2 green mana to cast. Lady Flower Mercia has flying, and while Lady Flower Mercia is in play, all creatures gain flying. It seems redundant to give her flying in that case, but sure, whatever. All damage done to Lady Flower Mercia by flying creatures is reduced to 0. So that is a neat legend in a time when most of the legends were uninteresting. But I'm getting really curious as to why the fuck he put the word anemic on these cards. It hasn't been relevant yet, but we are only like roughly halfway through these. This card is pretty fun. It would help make games interesting, for sure. Speaking of interesting, next is the artifact Leaden Mox. When Leaden Mox is put into play, all other Moxen and Lodi are destroyed. When Leaden Mox is in play, new Moxen and Lodi spells are countered. Yeah, get the fuck out of here with your Mox Emerald and your Lodi, you fucking jackass. Put that shit in the graveyard. Those cards were busted, and as fun as they can be, they are incredibly bullshit and game warping. I can't imagine how fucking annoying it was to play against Moxen decently often in the early games of Magic. Neat idea for the time, this card, and very funny as well. Leafy Greens is next, and this is an enchantment that costs 2 green mana to cast. It has cumulative upkeep too. This spell costs you 2 damage when successfully cast. All green creatures under your control gain +1/+2. That's neat. I think I mentioned most of these effects at the time affected both players, so that's novel. And clearly Paul thought cards like Bad Moon or Crusade were too good, which is a fair opinion to have. This is kind of neat, and it's a funny name too. Light Ritual! It's an interrupt that costs a single white mana, and it adds 3 white mana to your mana pool. Huh. That's a really creative card. It's funny the real game never made a card like this. We could call them rituals, as kind of a shorthand. Neato. Interesting. I guess this is a good thing that it's white, and white doesn't have access to stuff like Hypnotic Spectre or, God forbid, Necropotence. Otherwise, a card like this would be fucking busted. But it's a cool idea. Really interesting. Anyway, let's move on. To Little Lord Ibdib. A 0/0 creature that costs 3 black mana and 3 white mana. Oh, hey, you could use Light Ritual to help you cast this. That's neat. Anyway, it's anemic. Whatever that means. And Little Lord Ibdib comes into play tapped. It has +1/+1 while tapped. So at least it doesn't die immediately. When Little Lord Ibdib is untapped, all non-basic lands become basic lands of Ibdib, losing all their natural abilities and instead producing 1 colorless mana when tapped. Alright, so just moving past this whole not working in the rules thing, I think the idea here is that during your untap, this gets sacrificed and all non-basics in play become wastes, with a cool name. It doesn't actually require the Little Lord to leave play though. that's just a consequence of this happening. So if you had like a bad moon, you could keep this guy around and keep doing it, which would be pretty funny. This is a really interesting idea, and while I don't really understand what the story is here, I do think this is super fun. Does anemic mean what it normally means here? Like, these legends, do they have like a blood disorder? If all these legends have anemic on them and then it isn't referenced anywhere else on a single card, I'm going to be so upset. This feels like a troll, but I guess we'll find out. Marauding Penguins is next. It's a 7/7, holy shit, that costs 2 generic and 3 red mana. A fucking 7/7 for 5 mana? Holy shit. It has trample and protection from red, both of which are pretty good. Marauding Penguins may attack on the turn they are brought into play. Oh god. At the end of any turn in which this card is successfully brought into play, place this card in owner's graveyard no matter where it currently is. Holy shit. It's the gas graveyard decks needed, and its name is Penguins. This is a fun card. I was on the edge of my seat for this one. In the end, it's basically an expensive ball lightning, but you only have to hit a couple of times, so this animates pretty nicely with the haste that it has. Interestingly, if this gets exiled, it then still goes to the graveyard, which is kind of interesting. It's a pretty cool card. It's probably a bit over-indexed, but this whole concept that is going on here is fairly new territory for the game at the time, so it's not that surprising that this would miss the mark on power level. It's a super cool card, and honestly, it's even relatively balanced if you consider the experience of the person making this and the experience of the game at the time. This is very cool. Next is Mob Rule, which is a red enchantment that costs 3 and a red mana. It is cumulative upkeep 2. Lose 2 life when Mob Rule is put into play. While Mob Rule is in play, Counterspell, Mana Drain, Power Sink, Spell Blast, Blue and Red Elemental Blast, CounterOOP, and Force Spike are automatically countered. Huh. Well, he didn't mention Memory Lapse, so I guess this was before Homelands came out. That's really funny to just list every counterspell and say, yeah, this card says no. This is a Reddit custom card if I've ever seen one. I appreciate the cumulative upkeep on it though, very funny stuff. Oh yeah, you can still flash counter and remove soul into this, so that's kind of neat. Might have been 1 or 2, I'm forgetting, but there are at least 2 counter spells printed before this that aren't listed. I guess he also didn't mention Pyroblast or Hydroblast either. Maybe this was before Ice Age was out, but after the cumulative upkeep was spoiled or something? It's hard to say, but there are some counters that existed when this card was made that could get past this. And Hydroblast and Hydroblast and Pyroblast might have been on that list. I don't know. Ogilvy Poohman is a 6/3 anemic legend that costs 8 white mana to cast. Holy shit. It has protection from red, blue, black, and green, but it does lose hard to Assort's Plowshares. This card even mentions anemic in the flavor text. I've got this anemia thing, but I've been working out. I'm huge. That's probably a reference I'm not old enough to get. So, whatever. Good luck fucking casting this thing. Penultimate Hack is an enchant world that costs 2 red and 2 blue mana. Choose a basic land type when Penultimate Hack is cast. All spells cast after this card comes into play are altered so that any reference to land type is altered to now read the basic land type chose when this card came into play. Oh, okay, so it's basically like an illusionary terrain of sorts, or I guess a phantasmal terrain, because the way this card is worded makes me believe that he hadn't seen illusionary terrain. I don't know, it's hard to say. This is a neat idea. Penultimate Slight is also an enchant world but this one costs 3 and 2 blue mana, so it costs more, but you don't need red mana. Place a red, blue, black, white, or green counter on this card when Penultimate Slight is cast. All spells cast after this card comes into play are altered so that any reference to color is altered to now read as the color of the counter on this card. If the counter on this card is destroyed, remove this card from the game. Yeah, so it's an enchant world version of Sleight of Mind. Very cool. It's a neat idea that could make for some potentially interesting decks. It does kind of make you wonder if color changing could have been good if they gave it enough support that didn't suck. It's hard to say, but it's cool to see some interesting designs around the changing stuff because it's always been kind of a really neat idea. Pinkish Rose is next. It's an artifact that costs 0 to cast. Busted. Comes into play tapped. Oh, never mind, it sucks. Tap and sacrifice Pinkish Rose to gain 3 mana in any combination. This ability is played as an interrupt. Pinkish Rose is a restricted card. It counts as a Lotus. Huh. Well, it better count as a Lotus. It practically is one. Coming into play tapped obviously makes this much worse than Black Lotus. But Black Lotus can only make 1 color of mana, so this isn't strictly worse. I wonder if it was intended that you could only run this or Black Lotus with the counts as a Lotus thing, or if it was intended that you could run both. It's hard to say. But it is a pretty cool card, I guess, for the time. Probably pretty busted if you can run both. Up next is Pirate Kids, a 1/1 creature that costs 2 black mana. You can pay a black mana to give it banding. You can do the same to give it first strike. And you can pay 3 black mana to return it to its owner's hand. This is a pretty annoying card to deal with since they can just pull it back to their hand whenever you try to remove it, but at least the escape method makes them sit on 3 black mana, which is a lot. Otherwise, this is a fairly interesting card that's not really anything inspired. It's certainly not a unique or original idea. So let's move on to Poison Pill, an enchantment aura, or an enchant permanent that costs 2 blue mana. If Poison Pill is removed from play, permanent that Poison Pill enchants is removed from game. Huh. That's kind of interesting. My first reaction is that it's busted, but you do need to remove it to remove something else. And on second thought, this card sucks. But it is kind of cool. I don't know if blue is the color I would have made it, but I guess I don't hate it. It has that, oh, I'm a smug blue mage that did shit I shouldn't be able to by building this dumb Rube Goldberg machine vibe to it that I kind of appreciate. Yeah, it's kind of neat. I don't know, it's not good. I don't particularly, I guess I don't really have much of an opinion on it. I hated it at first, and then I thought it was kind of neat. At the end, I don't actually think it's an impactful card either way, so it doesn't really matter. Then we have Pretentious Bane, an enchantment that costs 2 white mana. While Pretentious Bane is in play, anyone may tap any beta land for mana. If 2 or more players wish to tap the same land, flip a coin to decide who may tap it. Winner must tap land and take mana into his or her mana pool. If no beta land is in play, destroy Pretentious Bane. So this card has a story, right? Paul here clearly played with at least one person that was super proud and pretentious about their beta land cards. And you may be asking why it says beta instead of alpha, but remember the corner radius made alpha cards unplayable until sleeves came out and got good enough to be used, which was not the case in 95. So anyone who would tell anyone forced to listen that their lands are from the first legal to play set would have been using beta lands, or beta cards rather. Very funny stuff. I like this card. I also like that he mostly solved the issues something like this would have. Making people flip a coin to see if they can use a beta land is pretty fucking funny. Requiring you to actually tap and draw the mana if you win the flip prevents some amount of griefing, Or at least it did when Mana Burn was around. Without Mana Burn, that countermeasure does nothing. But it's really hard to blame Paul for that, for a countermeasure not existing long after he designed the card. Anyway, it's very funny stuff. Let's look at Rat Poison, an artifact that costs 3 mana and comes into play tapped. When untapped, Rat Poison buries all rats in play. Plague, Swamp, Bog, etc. So he really liked the idea of trigger effects off of untap, which is certainly a novel concept. It's a pretty cool idea at the time, and without knowing his local meta, I have no idea if the rats deck needed to be brought down a peg, but they certainly were, which is pretty funny. Relatively cool idea. Then we have Reflected Gaze, an artifact that costs 4 mana to cast. Any rack or vice-based artifact in play is automatically and constantly retargeted at its owner while Reflected Gaze is untapped. Yeah, fuck you, Black Vice. These fuck this overpowered card that's annoying custom cards are always so funny to me. At least this costs 4 mana, so Vice can still be a problem for a little bit. But at the very least, Paul knew someone who fucking hated Vice and the rack, which is pretty funny. Next is River of Power, which is our first land to talk about. How cool! While River of Power is in play, all creatures with a combined power and toughness of 4 controlled by this card's owner may be tapped for 1 mana of the color of the rightmost mana symbol in that creature's casting cost, or 1 colorless. Okay, so any creature that is a 0/4, a 1/3, a 2/2, etc., can be tapped for a color of mana. It's a really interesting choice to not let multicolored cards choose what they tap for, instead tapping for the rightmost color. That's an interesting idea, and was probably fun to play with. I've never played with any of these, so I can't say for sure or not if they would be busted, especially the ones that don't really have a equivalent to a modern or normal card. But it feels like it had enough guardrails on it that it wouldn't be a problem. I think I'd like to see something like this be a legendary land, but at the time, if one player had a legendary permanent in play, then the other players would be sent to the graveyard immediately if they tried to play it, which I think would make this card a bigger problem than a player being able to have 2 of them. So I can see why he didn't. Either way, it's a pretty interesting idea. Then we have Robe of Sacrifice. This is an enchant creature that costs 2 and 2 black mana to cast. Controller of creature enchanted with this spell must place a card from their hand under this card during their upkeep. At the end of their turn, any card under this card is placed in graveyard. If creature that Robe of Sacrifice enchants dies, return cards under this card to their owner's hand. Okay, that's kind of neat. You put this on an opponent's creature and they have to discard a card each upkeep, but they have their whole turn to remove this and get their card back. That's kind of fun. Stuff like this can be more tracking and logistics than it's worth, but I don't think this one is too bad. It's a fun idea, and like most of these cards, decently balanced, or at least looks balanced without, rigorous playtesting. Like I said, I haven't played with any of these, so it's hard to say for certain. Next is the artifact, Scorched Earth End Djinn. This artifact costs 5 mana to cast, and you can tap it and sacrifice a land to force each opponent to destroy 1 land. Holy shit, it's like if Blood Moon and Strip Mine had a baby. Fuck yeah. Each opponent is insane. How fucking hated would this card be in EDH? Sack a land, blow up 3. What a fucking rate. Holy shit. This is really funny to think about. This card is probably fine in 1v1. I mean, maybe it's not, but 5 mana is a lot, and this thing doesn't, actually do anything on its own. I don't know. Like all cards, it depends on what's available around it and what people actually perceive the meta to be, so it's hard to say, but this is a really interesting idea. I'd have fun with it anyway. And next up is Significant Other, a sorcery that costs 2 black, 2 blue, and 2 red mana to cast. Caster may contact target player's significant other and ask him or her if the target player should continue to play Magic or quit. If the answer is quit, or any variation thereof, then target player loses the game. Otherwise, you suffer 5 damage. That's pretty funny. Sucks that this card means you need to get a divorce to hard lock yourself against the meta, but hey, you gotta do what you gotta do, you know? What a dumb idea. Anyway, let's look at Sylvan Heatmeister, a 0/1 Heatmeister that costs 3 blue mana to cast. You can tap Sylvan Heatmeister and take 2 damage. Just before your next discard phase, if this card is still in play, draw 1 card. Oh hey, that's kinda cool. It's a 0/1, so you need to jump through hoops, and if you do, this is tap, draw a card, which is pretty good. That's kinda neat. This card, for some reason, reminds me of Niel Sylvain, and maybe that's the point of it, but if so, Sylvan was spelled wrong. There are quite a few spelling mistakes in these. I haven't mentioned it because this was obviously just a fun project that someone made so he and his friends could have a good time. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to knock something like this for, you know, some spelling and grammar issues and typos and crap like that. But yeah, at least I thought this might be a reference to Niel Sylvain. But there's another Heatmeister later, so I'm not entirely actually positive of that. But at the time, this really kind of feels like it's referencing that, doesn't it? I don't know. But anyway, I guess let's move on. Let's talk about Syringus Frontbruttle, a 4/3 anemic legend that costs a black mana, 2 red mana, and 2 green mana for a total of 5. While Sir Angus Frontbruttle is in play, no artifact may be tapped or sacrificed to produce mana. If any enchantment is successfully cast on Sir Angus Frontbruttle, bury him. That's kind of neat. So this shuts down stuff like Felwar Stone and obviously the Moxen, but it's pretty easy to remove as a Paralyze or a Weakness or even a Spirit Link will just take this bad boy out. You also can't animate it with Animate Dead, which is interesting. And also he has a funny name. Up next is Sister Pain, a 2/2 assassin that costs 3 and 2 white mana for a total of 5 mana. Sister Pain has protection from red and from black, which are really solid colors to have protection from. You can tap Sister Pain to bury target red or black creature. Huh. So this is pretty much just a more versatile Northern Paladin with the added benefit of protection. It's pretty neat and quite strong, but I don't really have anything else to say about it. Spike in the Heart is an enchantment that costs 3 and 1 blue to cast. Players suffer 2 damage for every card they draw during someone else's upkeep. Huh. Interesting. That's really specific. Most instances where you would draw during someone else's upkeep are instants, and you could just draw those cards at a different phase. Huh. I actually can't think of anything that forces you to draw during your opponent's upkeep. Maybe there's a card in this pile that I forgot about, but most draw at the time, it was your upkeep or a fast effect. So I fail to see how this could ever put someone in an awkward spot, unless you use this and then hit them with like an Ancestral during your upkeep. That doesn't seem good. But it is an interesting idea, and maybe I'm missing something, but I don't know that this is ever actually something that would come up. I guess it's also worth mentioning, since it's a blue card that deals damage, that this was in 95, and like 5% of the blue cards actually dealt damage back then, so this was a kind of blue thing to do, so I'm not gonna knock him on that. Anyway, here's Star Destroyer. It's a 5/6 that costs 3 and a blue. It has flying and trample. During your upkeep, tap one of your creatures, then give an opponent's creature Island Walk, then take 1 point of damage. That's like every downside they could think of back in the day, and this card is still cracked. Holy shit, this just dunks on Juzam. It's Mahamodi Jin, but it comes down 2 turns earlier. I'm also not sure I would have made a Star Destroyer blue or made it give Island Walk. This one feels really forced compared to most of them, but this thing is really powerful, which, considering what a Star Destroyer is, does make sense. This is the first card that doesn't feel super balanced though, which is really impressive for a custom set. I guess the Penguin one was a little off, not as bad as this one in my opinion. This one feels super cracked, like should have known better cracked, but I don't know, maybe not. But yeah, it's a Star Destroyer. Anyways, we have Switcher's Transposifier. What is this, a fucking Calvin and Hobbes comic? Anyway, Switcher's Transposifier is an artifact that costs 7 mana. You can tap Switcher's Transposifier, and you and target opponent switch absolute control of all non-land permanents in play, including Switcher's Transposifier. Permanents remain in their tapped or untapped state. Put 2 tap counters on this card. Untap Transposifier only if there are no tap counters on it. At the end of controller's upkeep, remove 1 tap counter from Transposifier. Huh. So, first thing I noticed is the term absolute control, which doesn't really mean anything. Every card or permanent has owner status and controller status, and those aren't the same thing. But owner status is only fucked with on anti-cards. The use of absolute seems like an unnecessary word and just draws confusion. Like, are we talking about control or ownership? Probably control, but then why the term absolute? I don't know. It's whatever, but it did throw me off. Otherwise, this is just an unset style card. It's funny and interesting, and if your goal with Magic is just to have a wacky time, this is an awesome card to play. If you're trying to win some prize packs, this card would not be the most efficient way to do it, but it is a really funny idea. I don't know, it's really cool if you don't want to take Magic too seriously, which is pretty cool. It's certainly interesting, but it's also kind of stupid. Let's look at another land card though. This is Temple of Not Paul, an anemic legendary land. When Temple of Not Paul is in play, cards from the Annoying Kingdoms expansion set may not be untapped, and new spells from the set are automatically countered. Oh neat, it's the Set Hoser, which was of course an honored tradition at the time. Temple of Not Paul sits proudly with Apocalypse Chime and City in a Bottle and the rest. They got away from these pretty quickly, but these cards were originally thought of as an elegant solution to allow players to opt out of an experience. Not the best solution as it turns out, because then you need to buy into the experience to opt out of it, and but it started with noble intentions. Yeah, just the Set Hoser. We'll move on to Terror Cow. Terror Cow is pretty funny. This is a 0/0+ summon cow that costs X and 2 black mana to cast. When summoned, put X +1 life counters on Terror Cow. When Terror Cow is tapped, removed a life counter. Star is equal to the number of life counters on Terror Cow. Black to regenerate Terror Cow. And then you can pay 3 generic to add 1 life counter to Terror Cow. Okay, so this is interesting. It's kind of a reskin of Rock Hydra, but this is worded weird because it calls the counters +1 life counters. That phrasing makes me think it's like a toughness counter, but based on the rest of the text, it acts like a +1/+1 counter. So I guess it acts in the way of a +1/+1 counter, but can't be interacted with in the same way as a +1/+1 counter could. I don't know if that was intentional or if it was just intended for this to be a +1/+1 counter. It's not like terminology was really all that well solidified in 95 anyway, so it's possible this was just confused because the actual game was confused about shit like this. I don't know. It's hard to say why it was phrased this specific way. But the card is hilarious. And Terracaro is a great name for a card. And this card is pretty decent in like a limited kind of thing or anything like that. Anything where you're playing a game where you get to end game with a shitload of mana, something like this is kind of decent. Once you guys are playing efficiently and running a decent amount of removal, stuff like this is very bad. But when you're just playing with random cards, stuff like this is pretty decent and really fun and interesting. Next we have Towers of Kulith. Hilarious. This is an anemic legendary land. If there are no non-land permanents from the Ice Ages expansion set in play, controller of Towers of Kulith must sacrifice 4 lands or all lands, whichever is less, during upkeep. Tap, destroy target non-land permanent from the Ice Ages expansion set. Neat. It's the Ice Age hoser that we never got. So, I guess Ice Age was out when these cards were made? Neato. Maybe not. I don't know. Like I've said, the time frame on figuring all this out is hard. Some of the things make me believe he hadn't seen all the cards in Ice Age. Some things make me seem he had seen most of them. I don't know. It's hard to say. I'm just guessing. And this is a really interesting way to do a set hoser, I guess, with the downside of sacking your lands when you have succeeded. It's interesting. But we have not seen a single fucking thing that makes the anemic word relevant in any way. And we are very quickly running out of cards. I believe I have gotten trolled here. Trick or Treat. Trick or Treat is an instant that costs 3 and a blue mana. Choose 3 cards from target opponent's graveyard and place them in his or her hand. Well, that's pretty interesting. I can't think of anything you would do with this to break it or to make this like something that helps you win a game, but it is an interesting idea. I guess this would be a really awesome politic card in certain commander games, since you could have someone use their removal and then give them a nice little treat for helping you. I'm not sure there's an advantage to this in like typical 1v1 games, but it's certainly interesting and it would be really cool to figure out how to use this effectively in an actual game. It's a neat card. Then we have Trusty Frog. A 3/3 frog that costs 3 generic and a green mana. Trusty Frog is unaffected by any non-target spell or effect. Oh, interesting. Once again, stuff like this does not work in the rules, I don't think, but we can pretend it does. So, like I've said before with like Earthquake and Wrath of God, this avoids stuff like that, which is really interesting, and those cards are very strong. It does die to Lightning Bolt though, which is also a really strong card. This is not really a strong card, but stuff like this is super cool, especially for newer players and less experienced players that are just fucking sick of getting all their shit Wrath of Godded or Earthquaked. It's a neat idea. I think this kind of thing is really, really cool in a set like that. Then we have Uncle Joe's Transformation. An enchant creature that costs 1 and 2 green mana to cast. Target creature loses all of its natural abilities and becomes a Sapphire, Ruby, Emerald, Pearl, or Jet Mox. Caster's choice. Wait, this just turns a creature into a Mox? That's so fucking funny. 3 mana is probably really inspired here. Because at 3 mana, it's probably not worth it to do this? It's funny because this could be used as removal or to turn your dingus into like a mana rock, but 3 mana is rough for either of those choices. I think this is probably busted at 2 mana. Maybe not, but I would be really nervous to make a card like that. But at 3 mana, this probably just puts you at a disadvantage no matter how you use it. I mean, you could use it to turn a Shivan into like a Mox Ruby, which is pretty fucking funny and could be good for you. And I don't think this card is bad. I just think it's really awkward at a lot of mana costs for different reasons. But I also think that makes it really, really fucking interesting. And like, this would be a very, I think a card like this is more interesting than most people would realize. It's also very, very fucking hilarious. This is really fucking cool. I really like this. I think it's a very great idea. And like I said, I think it's really inspired to pick 3 mana for it. I think that's probably the safest place to put this. To have it not like just be fucking brutal. It's also very funny. You can combine it with like lead and mox and stuff like that in this set. Yeah, there's really funny things you can do here. Then we have Uthadin Heatmeister. Ah damn, more Heatmeisters. This one is a 2/1 that costs 3 white mana. You can tap Uthadin Heatmeister and it'll take 2 damage. Counter red or black spell being cast. Play this ability as an interrupt. Okay, so the Heatmeister probably isn't a Sylvain reference, which fair enough. This one is pretty neat because you don't actually have to mess around with keeping it around to activate its effect. It will still deal enough damage to remove itself if you don't take steps to prevent that, but the effect is good enough that like it's fine if that happens. Like, this card is good even if it goes away. 3 mana to counter like a really massive fireball or something is awesome. It is on board so they can see it, but that doesn't mean that they can just play through it. So, you know, it's a neat card. But I'm pretty sure that the art is just a colorized and color inverted or like negative effect applied to the Mona Lisa, which is also pretty funny. Probably didn't have the rights for that, but again, how the fuck, you know, what do I know? Let's look at Viral Clown, a 0/2 clown that costs 3 generic and 2 blue mana to cast. You can pay a blue mana and tap Viral Clown to put a Viral Clown token on target creature and tap it. While 1 or more Viral Clown tokens are on a creature, it loses all of its natural abilities and is instead considered a Viral Clown. During upkeep, a player may pay 3 to remove a Viral Clown token from any creature. Oh, that's neat. Very annoying pseudo removal. Seems fairly costed to me and more funny and annoying than actually good, but it's not bad. We're almost done with these though. We only have 3 left, so I guess let's get it done. Wheel of Jason is a sorcery that costs X and 2 red mana. When Wheel of Jason is cast, each player exchanges X cards from their graveyard with X cards from their library. Players then shuffle their libraries. X cannot be greater than the number of cards in the smallest graveyard or library in play. This card is restricted. That's pretty interesting. So it's like a weird fusion of Brain Geyser and Entomb, I guess? It's pretty strong in the right circumstances. This card would be way fucking insane in like today in CEDH probably. Maybe not because everyone needs stuff in their graveyards, but with stuff like Breach Lines with Lion's Eye and Wheel of Fortune existing now, there's a lot of stuff you could fucking do with this. I like this. I think it's pretty interesting and potentially powerful. It's more of a combo enabler than a value piece, but I do think this card is pretty interesting and really fucking busted. Smart to put restricted on it. I wonder how good it was in like this play experience. It's probably decent, but probably not as good. It's interesting. And of course the concept is really funny. But let's move on to Woodsy Angel, a 4/4 that costs 5 generic and 2 green mana. It has flying and first strike, and Woodsy Angel is unaffected by any spell or effect that changes who controls Woodsy Angel. Oh, that's kind of neat. Fuck your control magic. I guess you could also use this to wall a creature, because it doesn't say that you can't target this with control abilities, just that it's unaffected. I think a reasonable argument could be made that you could pick this when they tap their Preacher and they're just shit out of luck. It's hard to say whether that works or not with custom cards because there's no official rulings, and that really depends on whoever's like judging the event. But it's reasonable to argue you could do that. Either way, this is a neat card, and the red X covering his junk on the art is especially funny to me for some reason. I don't know. Interesting card, I guess. Kind of neat to do a kind of angel in green. It's weird to then not make it an angel, but like whatever, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. We got one card left, so let's look at the last card we have. This is Yelling Boy, a 0/1 summon child that costs 2 red mana. When Yelling Boy attacks, all declared blockers must block Yelling Boy. Okay, so it's basically a taunting elf before taunting elf existed. Solid card, pretty funny. Maybe not the happiest fantasy to represent children in combat, but it's a piece of cardboard, and it's definitely a pretty useful piece of cardboard, at least in most 1995 metas. Anyway, kinda interesting. Anemic was never relevant, what the fuck? Anyway, that's Annoying Kingdoms. Probably the first ever actual attempt at an unset, or joke set. This was very fucking cool to look through, and it was fun to see some of the references that were popular at the time. Like, I did not start this assuming I would think of the fucking Bee Gees, but here we are. Honestly, I was blown away by how cool and interesting many of these cards were. I wouldn't call them all good Magic cards that would be like good for the game, and the more unset cards aren't really my vibe most of the time, but I think this whole thing was overall super well done. Dude obviously understood a lot more about game design than the average fan making a custom set. And I can personally imagine having a really good fucking time both with and against a lot of these cards, and that's pretty cool, and especially rare for a lot of custom stuff. But yeah, I guess that's really all I have for you today. There is not a lot of information on these cards, and I was frankly blown away that the Magic libraries even had scans of the set. Still, even with all the context that we don't have, I think it's really neat looking through this stuff and seeing how fans saw and thought of the game at the time. For example, pretty much every card in this that affected all of something only affected your stuff or your opponent's stuff. This is how cards are designed now, but at the time that was very rare, and it's a change that happened naturally over time as game designers realized that players prefer stuff like this. It also did become apparent around like the Sliver era that too much stuff that affects both players just kind of makes the game miserable and slow in a lot of situations. Still, I personally do prefer the old way of doing things, but that's entirely opinion-based. A lot of people disagree, and I don't think they're wrong for it. There's so many ways to enjoy Magic that none of this really matters anyway. But yeah, I think I'll stop rambling now. Hopefully you enjoyed looking at new cards from 1995, as this experience doesn't happen very often these days. But with that, you can like the video if you liked it, you can subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you very much for watching.